Yesterday was the day of the ESL Open Cup number 115 in Europe, and I decided to participate. My first opponent was Gref, a 5.2k Protoss player that I had never played against before, but I had a bit of a gut feeling that this might just be a cheesy player. So I decided to, although he is about 1500 MMR lower than me, I decided to play with ultra focus, do everything in the early game as correct as possible. And I even had an inkling that he might be opening up with a cannon rush, so I decided to slightly alter the way that my probe was moving, trying to spot any probes from passing me by. Well, he didn't decide to take that path, but I do spot a very quick probe that wants to enter my main way before a probe is supposed to be here. So I decided to pull a second worker, make sure he can't block any pylons. And at this point, I am kind of believing that this is going to be a cannon rush, so I need to be careful about anything happening behind my mineral line. He throws down one pylon, and this confirms my suspicions that this indeed is going to be a cannon rush. Now, as a result, I pull a couple of workers to try and fight this first probe. I see the second probe get up as well, start my zealot, and I pull a bunch of probes to make sure that neither one of these two probes can actually get a cannon up. So just microing my workers here. Both probes die at about the same time, and I am safe against the cannon rush. I counterattack with 2 adepts and one of my zealots, while at the same time proxying a Stargate and trying to get a pylon on the low ground. Now, in order to get as much damage as possible, I need to keep these adepts alive for as long as I can, so I decide to hold position them between the gases. This means that my opponent is now not allowed to get any gas and makes it really difficult to get enough units out or any type of tech to actually deal with my proxy void ray. At the same time, I build a nexus so that my batteries start with extra energy, and in case I actually finish the nexus, I can use a super battery, guaranteeing me some type of win. Now, the game is pretty much over at this point, and the moment my void ray shows up, his second stalker is barely out. I use prismatic alignment on it, he sees the battery and the nexus, decides to tap G and leave the game. 1-0 in favor of me. The second game of the series starts in a similar vein. My opponent opens up with a 4 pylon wall. This time I'm not as attentive with my initial probe micro, and he actually manages to get these pylons down without me capable of getting to the inside of this. I have to chrono boost out a zealot and start my cybernetic score, because there's no way I'm breaking this without any other cannons coming up. However, when his cannon finishes up, he's stuck with a rather annoying issue, and that is that he can't build a secondary cannon. All he can do right now is rely on this one cannon to try and kill this gateway. Now, there is a pylon here that belongs to me, or that belongs to him, that was blocking, and I built a second gateway, because I probably will need a second gateway in the future, but also because I want to block this probe from getting to the top side over here and build another cannon that might be in a useful position. The moment this stalker pops out, I'm most likely going to be safe, this probe dies, and once again I'm in an absolutely fantastic position. I'm up 4 workers, my opponent does not have any gases yet, cybernetic score is just now starting, while my stalker is already done, and I'm just overall just in a brilliant position. This cannon is not threatening anything, this gateway will end up dying and these zealots might cause some trouble, but my spot is as good as it gets. And as I clean up this little position, my opponent decides to reverse the roles from last game and actually proxies his void ray. There's no nexus here yet, but there's still the possibility that it comes down. And he also decides to build a battery. Now, I'm going into a quick nexus, blink on the way as well, and I scout that something weird is happening. Send my stalkers over there. I know my opponent has absolutely nothing at home. There was only a single pylon there. That's why I was scouting around the map with this zealot and the probe. I see that it's a proxy void ray. GG, well played, congrats. And I win my first series 2-0 against a cheeky cannon rusher. My next opponent is ShaDoWn, and nothing much happens in the early game as both of us have different openers. My opponent opened up with a sentry into a stalker with a quick Stargate as well, allowing for an oracle. I decided to open up with 6 adepts, which I want to shade across the map, try and deal a bit of damage with, while teching into a robotics facility. The robotics facility is to add some safety. I have very little scouting information, and I'm most likely going to lose all of these adepts. If my opponent goes for any type of Stalker pressure, I need an Immortal to defend that, and thus I decide to build a Robotics Facility. However, because my opponent has an Oracle, which I spotted by the way, this Robotics Facility is simply not going to be too useful. My first ShaDoWn with the Adepts also isn't brilliant and gets nothing done. I am up 2 workers without much happening, so I don't feel too bad right now. With my first real ShaDoWn, after losing 1 Adept to the Oracle earlier, I kill 1 worker and then shoot down the sentry. My control here wasn't super on point, and as a result I only managed to get 2 worker kills and a single sentry while I lose 5 Adepts. At the same time, ShaDoWn decides to counterattack with 2 Adepts of his own. I am not quite sure how many Oracles there are out or how many Oracles there are going to be, so I'm extremely afraid of pulling Stalkers into my main base. However, because the threat of 2 Adepts is pretty big and I recently saw the Oracle still at his own home with low energy, I decided that I could pull all Stalkers to deal with this little problem. I clean everything up, but I lose more workers than he lost against my 6 Adepts total. And ShaDoWn right now is in a good position with fast blink, a good Stalker count and the ability to take a fast third base. He is just looking really good in this PvP. After some trading back and forth with Stalkers, we find ourselves in a mid game in which I decided to play Disruptors, while ShaDoWn decided to play Chargelot, Archon, Stalker. With these Stalkers he can blink on top of Disruptors and try to snipe them, which is why my Immortal and my Zealots are so extremely valuable. While this little engagement is happening, an Oracle manages to pull off a stasis in the main base, and my Super Battery makes sure that I stay alive, at least for now. I still have 1 Disruptor shot left over, and the second Disruptor shot is now on the way. It's a tricky engagement. It's always tricky to defend this type of push, especially if you don't have any forward batteries, because you're kind of forced to move into this position, otherwise your third base might be in trouble. The fact that I have 2 cannons there is of course going to help, but yeah, constantly moving back and forth against this army is just pretty tricky. I also need to make sure that my Disruptors don't get exposed, otherwise they can just get blinked upon. He decides to kind of rotate away and loses a couple of units in the retreat. Not the greatest fight for him, and at this point I feel pretty powerful. I know that I've stabilized, I just don't know what my opponent's position is, especially when it comes to the economy. I don't know whether he has 4 bases, if he's on 3 bases with very low gas count, or what's happening. Like, these little trades are not going to be game deciding. I do realize that he's trying to push me towards the bottom side here, and I already start warping in towards my natural. Now, we can see here that I am correct, as he is also warping towards the left side with his warp prism. He actually backs himself into a corner, and I get 1 big Disruptor shot, which barely manages to connect before the recall is done. This is a significant army, but with a Super Battery, a couple of units, and of course with the rest of my army moving back, ShaDoWn makes the correct call and moves away with this part of the army, and we're kind of starting to set up for a more standard mid game. He should already be starting to transition into a Robo Bay and a second Robotics Facility and getting a 4th base. His +2 is a little bit delayed, but overall a pretty even game. I get the map control because I have the better upgrades in this case, and I decide to push in a little bit. I don't really want to engage into my opponent and take a bad trade. I just want to keep this watchtower for as long as possible so that I have map control and I can decide the pace of the game. I also have the left side tower, which allows me to spot any incoming run-bys. However, while I'm checking if there's any run-bys coming, I don't pay attention to my main army, and the Disruptor shot hits basically everything. I jump in to kill 1 extra Disruptor, but that was a pretty painful trade, and while we were equal in supply and I was up in upgrade, right now my opponent is actually up in supply. The only reason he currently can't move out is because I still have possession of this watchtower. He's going to try to break that by sending a big army towards the left side of the map and trying to pull me out of position, trying to pull me away from this watchtower. I understand, however, the importance of this watchtower, and I defend by working a couple of Dark Templars, a couple of Zealots, and unless he has detection with him, which he seems to have, it's going to be really difficult to break it. And even with detection, if there is a Super Battery available, it is often quite hard to break a position like this. This is going to be a key moment in this game. I try to hold the watchtower with my Disruptors while I'm intercepting a flank that he was trying to set up. However, my own secondary army is not fighting the flanking army. So I'm fighting half of my army against half of his army. However, his army consists of Archons and a couple of DTs. Against my Stalkers, that's a pretty powerful army. At the same time, my Disruptors get pushed back and he gains control of the Watchtower as well as he gets to cancel my 5th base. I clear up his little flanking army, but I lose the 5th and more importantly, I lose control of the center Watchtower. That makes it really difficult for me to try and take this 5th base because he's just going to have so much vision over here. We poke back and forth a little bit, throwing Disruptor shots, but I now know that the tower is lost. I do rebuild my 5th base on the right side rather than taking the left, because this one I also really struggle with. At the same time, I warp in a couple of DTs to try and harass any 5th base that he tries to get up. These DTs are going to be successful as there's no real defense over there. At the same time, I'm trying to deal with this position, but it's not quite working. The game starts to become chaotic when a Prism warps in a couple of Dark Templars in my natural and I have to bust my super battery in order to try and defend that. At the same time, there's a big DT force outside of my 4th base and his main army is outside of my 5th. However, he forgot to leave defenses at home and a bunch of DTs run into his natural. There are fights happening at 4 places at the same time and I just gotta make sure that my Disruptors don't die here. I'm sending as many Purification Novas as I can to make sure that I can zone out my opponent's army. At the same time, I don't want to lose these DTs and I right click the Nexus, take it out. I want to save my probes because I now realize that there's no real way for me to hold this 4th base. So I decide to just give it up. Well, I try a Zealot and DT warp in, but obviously that ain't going to work. I run away with my Dark Templar as I saw a recall with a couple of Stalkers. I don't get to get all of my Dark Templar home, but I do get control back of this Watchtower because I managed to kind of force him back with the DT run by. Like I said, this Watchtower is extremely important. 4th base can be rebuilt and with a couple of cannons will be capable of going up. There's a mothership on the way for my opponent and he has double Stargates. He is way further up the tech tree than I am and I feel some pressure to try and do something in this game. I leave my Disruptors at this Watchtower while I move my main army towards the left side. This is a very common trick. You show your army on one side while hiding Disruptors. My opponent is probably paying attention to my main army and loses absolutely everything to, well, honestly, some of the best Disruptor shots that I've seen in my entire life. It's literally 6 shots of just hitting as much as they can. A long pass after GG, and then the epic line of 1 second of AFK brain. GG, and I'm up 1-0 in the best of 3. For the second game, I decided to pull out a very tricky build, and this is the Nexus first. Now, the Nexus first used to get countered by a Zealot being sent across the map, followed up by a Proxy Stargate. However, because the Proxy Stargate is a lot weaker now with the Void Ray nerfs and the battery nerfs, a lot of Protoss players don't know what the counter is to the Nexus first. Honestly, I have no clue what the counter is to Nexus first either, but I also have no clue how to respond to a lot of things. So this Nexus first play was kind of a bluff out of me, saying, hey, I hope that you believe that I know how to defend, while in reality I had absolutely no clue how to defend some of the more difficult all-ins. I'm scouting across the web with a worker to try and figure out what he's doing, as I'm chasing this worker still at the same time. I don't want him to proxy something. I do kind of suspect that there's going to be some type of proxy pylon on the map already, as it's just really common. I see the lack of a warp gate researching, or I saw it start too late, and it's extremely suspicious, obviously. There is a second pylon in the main base, but there's no pylon on the low ground, and there's not even an attempt at trying to fake it. So I know right now that there is going to be at least one single pylon that is proxied. I don't know what building it is proxying, and as I don't see any of the first 2 units, I can't really know if it's going to be a proxy gate or a proxy adapt. He built his Nexus on the 3rd base because he believed that I would finish the pylon. He was mistaken. I did not finish the pylon. He barely managed to squeeze by the worker. That, honestly, I wasn't born yesterday, so I already have a probe on patrol. I make sure that I have enough money to throw down the battery, and as I see them shade in, whoop, throw down the battery, and this threat has been pretty much nullified. I'm not aware that there's a Proxy Stargate, but I defend his first Oracle pretty easily nonetheless. He gets 0 kills and actually ends up losing it. At the same time, a single Adept did manage to sneak into my natural and gets 2 worker kills. It's not the end of the world, as I'm still going to be, well, slightly up in workers because my nexus is producing 1 more worker. I have 2 gateways producing units. I have a lot of stalkers on the map. I'm up about 7 army supply, and there's no real way for my opponent to get back. The second Oracle should not be capable of dealing more damage than the first one. However, because my stalkers are, well, slightly out of position, they're completely out of position here, this Oracle is going to be able to sneak in and I think get at least 2 worker kills, maybe even a third one. No, just 2 worker kills. My blink starts slightly faster than my opponent's. I have a quicker forge as well, and I'm setting up for an absolutely fabulous mid-game. I'm setting up for a +2 timing attack here, as I know that my upgrades are faster. I want to do a +2 timing attack, trying to deny my opponent's fort base, while getting a fort base myself. I scouted that there's a Dark Shrine on the other side of the map. However, what I did not expect to come out of the Dark Shrine is Shadow Stride and more than 2 DTs. Now, these stalkers were looking for a single DT. They end up finding about 8. And right now I'm pretty confused, and I'm starting to believe that my opponent wants to play a more base tradey style. Rather than going into a standard game and saying, hey, we're just going to play Charge-Lot Archon against Charge-Lot Archon, he does not want to engage into that because he knows he's down an upgrade. And as a result, he has this weird little playstyle with Gateway, well, this is not a Gateway, but a Stargate, a Gateway proxied on the map here, still a pylon over here as well, which will allow him to warp in close by. And whenever I move out, he will try to move in, and that can be extremely tricky to deal with. You see my army moving, I'm just trying to stay in the center. I'm getting a robotics bay, not for disruptors, but to try and get observer speed as fast as I can. Well, catch a couple of DTs, but with the blink away and without observer speed, there's no real point. As I move out, my opponent moves in and manages to get a cancel on the fort base. Whenever you're playing against a style like this, it is important to split your army in 2 parts to try and surround your opponent's army. Well, we get a little bit of that over here as I take out 2, 3, maybe even 4 stalkers. I have to rebuild my fort base and he is winning a lot of time. However, he's not really transitioning into anything, as all that he's building right now is more stalkers and more Dark Templars. I get a minor win as I manage to body block about 5 Dark Templar, and then with the help of a force field and another blink from my side, we'll be able to clean up all 5 of these DTs. At the same time, I am bleeding out some of my secondary army in the middle of the map, with some Stalker reinforcements however, and still with the superior upgrades as well, I do manage to turn that fight into my favor, and my opponent is in a bit of trouble. He has no big DT squad on the map anymore. His Stalker squad has been caught as well. Right now I'm up in Stalkers, I'm up in Zealots, I'm up in Archons, I have a Prism and I have better upgrades. He needs to make some type of play within the next few seconds to make sure that he can stay alive. And that play is moving in towards my third base. I try and surround my cannon with my probes, but I'm not in time. I need to get some type of detection here, and I decide to recall one of the observers that was sitting somewhere over here. I warp in 2 stalkers, but sadly they get taken out by the DTs. I don't quite realize that in time, and I actually end up losing a fair amount of workers to just 2 simple DTs. A 4 stalker warp in, of course, eventually will be capable of dealing with this. But this was not the greatest trade. It was not the trade that I was hoping for. And right now ShaDoWn is actually up in worker count. He has a lot of money in the bank. He has 10 gateways. And sure, my army quality is still slightly better, but there's no immortals in here. And the only real reason why this looks kind of good for me is because I have higher army supply and because I'm still up an upgrade. But otherwise, it's honestly kind of scary. DT is still trying to deal some damage. They don't quite get it. I need to either get a couple of extra probes or I need to start fighting real soon. And fighting real soon is exactly going to be my plan. As I decide, you know what, seems to be a lot of cannons and batteries here. What actually happens if I move in towards his natural base location? Rather than fighting at a base where there's going to be loads and loads of static defense, how about I go to a base where there's absolutely no defense whatsoever? It's kind of funny to see, by the way, that a lot of the time when people play a lot of DTs, they don't actually have any defense themselves. Not a single cannon here, no cannon here, no detection in the main base either. 2 zealots go in towards his natural base location, start going to town there. I'm up a single upgrade in shields right now. Decide to snipe the battery, the super battery, as his goal seems to be to snipe as many observers as he can. He managed to tag one of them, blinks forward, but doesn't quite get it. Thus these DTs are not going to be too useful. There's a couple of Archons here for me. My Zealots killed absolutely every single worker without him being capable of doing anything. He snipes the observer and immediately blinks in with the DTs. Now I do have an observer on the way towards my army, but it's going to take a while to get there. I pick up some Archons that were getting pretty low and push them further towards the back. As my observer arrives with this army and I blink forward, I kill a lot of DTs. He tries to go in for another observer snipe. He gets one of the two, but there's still a second observer, which I'm microing very carefully. GG gets called, and I win the series 2-0 against ShaDoWn. My next opponent for a best of 3 was going to be Trifax. Trifax just managing to beat Disc, a strong 6.5k player on the European ladder. And also a Protoss, so I was a little bit worried for this. However, I do have some ace builds up my sleeve, and I decide to open with a 4 Adept Glaive. However, I'm not getting a robotics facility. This allows me to get a really quick fort base, faking some type of Stargate play. With this, I want to force out spores rather quick, and I also want my opponent to not build any roaches, or maybe, if I'm lucky, even delay their roach warren. While I do that, I move out with 9 to 10 adepts, and behind that I'm going to transition into a double Stargate follow-up with Phoenixes. So I pretend to play Stargate, then I show Glaive adepts, and then I actually play Stargate as a follow-up. It is the perfect 1-2 punch. And as my adepts arrive, I realize that my opponent is extremely underprepared. He went up to 48 drones, way too many workers. He only has 10 links, and he needs to start running drones away the moment I arrive. 26 more links are in production, and I haven't dealt a lot of damage yet. However, that is sure to come. If I have to fight pure Ling with Glaive adepts, that's always going to be a good fight. And although this first trade doesn't look brilliant, it is still an extremely effective trade. I only lose 2 workers. He has lost a crap ton of units already. And my adepts are continuing to just deal damage against links. I start taking out a couple of drones, left, right and center as well. These queens aren't quite dying, as 2 extra adepts that I decided to run across the map will also show up, will allow me to get 1 or 2 more workers. The adepts in the main base are still going strong, and behind this I'm already building Phoenixes. I'm continuing pro production, and I'm up 12 workers at this point. Excuse me, 22 workers. Counting remains difficult for me, as I've killed 11 workers and I forced out so many units that there's almost no real way for my opponent to recover from this. And as with any good 1-2 punch, the second punch follows very quickly after the first one. My 5 Phoenixes fly across the map. He is once again completely unprepared. I lift his queens up and I start going to town on them. I micro away the weak Phoenix, not wanting to lose anything here, as he sends over another queen into the slaughter. More queens moving in towards this location, but it's not going to be enough to hold this position. Overlords are gonna be going down, and he's still down about 9 workers. I'm already making plans for a fort base at this point. I have my extra upgrades on the way. My opponent barely managed to read layer tech. More adept shading in towards his natural, and with all of this in his natural, the Phoenix is standing in between bases. There is just no real way for him to clean this up. And even if he could clean this up, he's still just down so many workers. He's down so much in tech, down so much in infrastructure, that there's no real way to recover. It takes a while for him to understand that as well, that there's no way to get back. But as I'm doubling his supply, I'm going to be up a base and up an infinite amount of units. He decides that maybe now finally is the time to tap out. GG, and I win game number 1. Not having dropped a map yet in the entire tournament. This time I decide to open up with a quick 2 Adept Chrono Boost, followed by an Oracle. I see that there's too many Zerglings in his main base, and I decide, you know what, I'm not gonna risk it to get the biscuit. I'm not that hungry for the biscuit anyway, so I'm just going to keep these Adepts stuck in between these 2 mineral patches, and maybe if he decides to march across the map with a bunch of links, I can shade in and get a couple of drone kills. At the same time, my Oracle starts moving out, looking to see if I can deal some damage. Most of the time, you're not going to be capable of getting, well, to be honest, really anything, as Zergs have gotten so good at positioning their queens that with the first Oracle, it is extremely rare to get anything done whatsoever. And as usual, he has 2 queens in position, he micros them well, and I don't even get a single shot off. I decide in my anger that, you know what, if I see a creep tumor here, I'm going to shoot it, and boom, just like that. Throws down a creep tumor. I see a larva, so I'm like, oh, larva, you also die. This is obviously not exactly what I want, but I will have to be happy with it for now, as there's no other way for me to get them. After a couple of unsuccessful attempts of trying to get some worker kills, I decide to go in with triple oracles, and I see no queens here. That allows me to kill 4 drones for free. Oh well, for free. One of the oracles getting pretty darn low. If I'm not careful, it might actually end up dying. Lynx finally find my adepts as well. They were still stuck in between these 2 mineral patches. And I decide that it's getting a little bit too tricky for me here. It might be better if I actually leave this position and just go back home. The oracles will, well, maybe escort these adepts a little bit if any Lynx decide to show up, but as no Lynx show up, I'm pretty safe here. More adepts do end up joining with this force. I warped in 4 extra, help me deny a little bit of creep. Behind this I'm getting a Robo Bay, Twilight Council +1, extra gateways, and I'm trying to boot my worker count up to 66, 67, so I can start working on getting good infrastructure and perhaps eventually even a fort base. The game becomes a little bit more chaotic as a bunch of banelings decide to waddle in towards my 3rd base mineral line, and as Centrifugal Hooks finishes up, gets my battery and also actually ends up getting 6 worker kills. I decide to try and send something over there, but more banelings do end up showing up, actually kill a bunch of zealots. At the same time he moves out, so I'm a little bit panicked. I haven't been capable of spending my money. I sent my disruptors forward to try and get some cheeky pot shots off on these roaches. The earlier I can use my purification novas, the quicker they will be back, so I also want to do that as fast as possible on his side of the map. However, my main army is not really in position. 1 Archon is in a weird spot. I do have a Zealot warp in the main base, and that's going to be able to deal a bit of damage, but at the same time the super battery is not actually healing. All my disruptors are going to fall before they get second shots off, and I still have 1600 minerals in the bank. I do have 10 gateways, which will allow me to warp in stuff quickly, but this wasn't the cleanest hold, as I end up losing 17 workers. I also kill 11 workers on the other side of the map, and my opponent, rather than building back drones, decides to get more Lynx and roaches, holding down that unit key. I warp in a bunch of zealots in his main base, and I get the snipe on his main. Now, of course, not the biggest deal in the world, as he still has more bases which he can mine from, and as he doesn't actually have that many workers anymore, he's not missing out on any major income source. The game kind of stabilizes for a bit, and I'm starting to feel in a very comfortable position, continuing my upgrades, getting cannons up, increasing my Archon size, or my Archon numbers, and still having a prism on the map as well for any potential counterattacks. Send a couple of zealots towards the far left side as well, in case, well, hello, zealots. I'm sending some zealots to the far left side of the map. There we go, I'm sending some zealots to the far left side of the map. There we go. I'm sending some zealots to the far left side of the map, and they can function as a run by, either with an attack or as a counter attack, as I'm planning on killing my opponent right now. And once I reach max and 15 Archons, I decide that the time is now to pull the trigger. I do a semi-split here on my Archons as all the banelings disappear before they really get to my zealots. Some small zealot splits as well over here, making sure that these banelings can't connect with those zealots, or at least not super effective. I have a huge army still. He has absolutely nothing that even remotely resembles an army. My +3 is about to finish up. Maybe I should have waited with that, or for that, with a massive 200 supply army, but I knew that I had a kill timing and I decided to take it. A couple of zealots in the main base once again cancel that main hatchery, and as my oracles, archons and zealot move forward, there is absolutely nothing left for my opponent but one thing, and that is to tap out and say GG, because this series is completely over. And with that, I get my second win in this series. I win the best of 3. GG confirmed Protoss easy race. We were joking before, he wasn't serious. I type GG as well, and I move on to the next round to face Clem. And that first game against Clem has a relatively uneventful early game. I try to scout with my Phoenixes, take a little bit of damage. I scout again, manage to spot my opponent's third CC. I already have a fast third myself. I have a battery there, so I feel extremely safe. I'm already building a robotics bay as well. I get scouting with my observer. So I just have a really solid early game. I get to do what I want to do, and he gets to do what he wants to do. Nothing really happens. I have good info. He doesn't really have any info whatsoever, except for the fact that I have a Stargate, and that's what he will need to live with for now. He is planning to push out in a little bit as he takes out the Observer, and I'm spotting every little move that he makes. I have the Watchtower as well, so vision enough as his third CC flies over to his third base location. He pokes and prod with a little Marine Force, but I'm not afraid as I'm in position near a battery. I still have vision with this probe on the Watchtower as well, so I see his rotation. At the same time, I'm taking out SCVs with my Phoenix squad, and his worker count actually isn't looking all that brilliant anymore. I miss my force field. These Marines are still allowed to pass through, and with some poor movement, I actually almost end up losing a Phoenix for free here. Colossi is almost out, and the moment you get one Colossi against Marines, well, the Marines just aren't that powerful anymore. One Colossi absolutely swipes them to death. And I'm not talking about Tinder, no, it's lasers here, all the way. Force field does absolutely nothing. I get a couple of Marines, but I'm up in workers. I have a pretty decent army. I have a lot of Phoenixes to deal with drops. And I decide to throw down a fleet beacon and a second Stargate to try and go into carriers from here on out. I know that Clem sometimes struggles with those. I haven't seen him play against it in a while, but I know in the past he hasn't been too fond of it, and I've beaten him in the past with it as well, so I have good memories of it. And I decide, you know what, let's pull this one out once again and see if it will work. Clem opts for a Viking Ghost push, while I have double Stargate Phoenix with the quick range as well. That means that I actually trade pretty well against Vikings, and especially with Guardian Shield, I don't take too much damage. A lot of the Vikings go down pretty quickly, and my Phoenixes, well, they stay alive, at least for a large part. I try to chase this army as well as I can, and with the Observer I have vision of my opponent's fort base as well. I try to pick off anything that I can without losing too many of these units, and I also don't want to expose my army to any type of flanking. I'm currently up about 25-30 supply, and I'm feeling pretty good in this game. However, I should not get too cocky or too greedy. He has a lot of Vikings on the way. I have 2 carriers that are currently not with my army. I'm floating a fair amount of money, which probably should be invested right now into either extra Stargates or, well, into at least something that helps me to produce units. Maybe a second robotics facility or even a 5th base. As I'm not doing any of these, it is going to be really difficult for me to spend this money moving forward. I tend to throw down a couple of extra cannons, but that is not going to help me in a direct engagement, as Clem keeps poking back and forth with these Vikings, never giving the interceptors a chance to really get out of the carrier. At this point in the game, Clem is continuously rotating from one side to the other, trying to find any type of pickoff. Whenever I make a misstep, he picks off a Phoenix or he snipes a carrier. Once again, he'll go for a carrier right now. He'll turn around to get a Phoenix, and he tries to make sure that the interceptors can never leave the carrier. When I retreat, the Vikings with their superior speed manage to take out another carrier, and these are the traits that he wants. He takes out 5 Phoenixes, 2 carriers, and barely loses any Vikings. And even if he does lose any Vikings, he has triple starports with reactors, pumping out massive amounts of Vikings. And although the traits aren't necessarily super impactful, it is extremely annoying for me to continuously have to be rebuilding carriers, as carriers take a really long time to build. And whenever these are in the Stargate, it means I have less supply to actually work with. You see that the Phoenix count is growing. As Clem, now that he's maxed, actually wants to fight a bit of a bigger fight. I'm still trying to dodge it, as I don't feel comfortable in my position currently. I know that he has more Vikings, I know he has a lot of Ghost, and with an EMP on top of my Phoenixes, I don't feel comfortable engaging into this army. I throw a couple of Disruptor shots, hoping that I can hit something, but Clem is just a little bit too solid. Poking back and forth, making sure that he never gets hit by anything major. And as Clem is continuously pushing in, trying to take out some static defense, then running away, I decide that I've had enough. With these next 2 carriers arriving with my main army, with my 2-1 upgrades, I say, now I've had enough. I start changing with my Phoenixes. There's a lot of Vikings in the sky, but there's actually not that much bio to zone out my Phoenixes. Once again, the Interceptors just don't manage to come out, and I'm getting kind of frustrated. At the same time, a massive nuke hits everything here towards the left side. These Phoenixes still chasing, actually doing a decent job at taking out these Vikings. It is 17 Vikings against 15 Phoenixes. This army is extremely overstimmed. I, however, only have a single Colossi. So, even though this army consists of mainly Marines, it will take a while for me to take those out. Interceptors are getting destroyed by these Marines, by the Ghost, and also, quite frankly, by these Vikings. My supply is looking good, but if I don't hit a lot of these Disruptor shots, it might not actually be great. A lot of Phoenix in production as well, and this looks like a big army, but without any Interceptors, the carriers actually aren't that useful. Once the Viking count gets too big, which is going to be the case right now, as it's 5 starports or 4 starports with a reactor producing continuous Viking Liberator, I actually can't win this engagement. The reinforcements are too much, and as he pushes me back, I'm down 20 supply, he has beautiful upgrades, I have absolutely nothing. I'm in a world of trouble right now, and I need to get back home ASAP and try to muster up some type of a defense. Sadly, I never managed to properly set up a defense, as he pushes in quickly, snipes the only robotics facility I have. There's too many Vikings for me to deal with. 5 Phoenixes, 1 carrier against 22 Vikings. Of course, there's still some bio on the ground as well with those 3-3 upgrades. There's no way that I can win this, and as my final Phoenixes end up dying, I type out GG, and Clem is up 1-0 in the best of 3. On the second map, Clem decides to build the eBay on the wrong side of the map. And rather than building it in his own main base, he decides to build it where I want to be building my natural. I pull down 4 workers immediately to try and deal with it as soon as I can. And I do a good job at dealing with this as well. I of course know the proper response versus an eBay block. I put 1 probe on every corner, so it's difficult for him to continue building. Get a second pylon on the low ground. I take it out, and then eventually I will throw down my own nexus. However, what this does do is that it doesn't allow me to get a faster second gas, at least if I want to have a timely nexus as well. And Clem, because he opens up with a quick marine, also gets a really fast factory on his side of the map, and this gives him potential for a lot of aggressive build order. And in particular, there's one build order that he really likes to play against people that enjoy opening up Stargate, and that is a 5 marine, 1 cyclone push. But I have a plan against. And that plan consists of 2 adepts and 1 stalker, all chrono boosted out with a 4th unit on the way. While getting blink at the same time, I say I want to get an as high probe count as I can, while getting as many units as I can, and still having quick tech as well. And the way to do that is by skipping the second gateway. I also decided to skip my battery, because whenever I practiced against this build, that wasn't actually necessary. However, in my practice, I wasn't playing against Clem, and Clem's micro seems to be, well, quite frankly, a little bit better than most other Terran players. His cyclone control is honestly second to none, as he is now on purpose not locking onto the close by stalker. I lose every single stalker, and all of a sudden I'm in a bit of trouble. I lost 3 workers already. This stalker cannot reach the cyclone either. I do manage to break the lock on, but once again, I just can't connect with the cyclone. I get 1 more shot off, the stalker dies. I have absolutely nothing left right now. I pull more workers, and I at least get a surround on these marines, but this is looking very, very bad. What was supposed to be a pretty easy hold, because I knew what was happening, now turns into an absolute disaster. Once again, he micros his cyclone back just in time. I don't get anything done here. I lose my final stalker, and I have nothing to defend, with only a single gateway to warp in, which was off cooldown, and 2 cyclones in my natural. There was nothing that I could do anymore. I already had stim on the way as well. And just like that, within 4 minutes and 35 seconds, Clem ruins my run and also ruins my dreams of winning an ESL Open Cup again. And yeah, that's going to be it for me today. Thanks all so much for watching. I hope you did enjoy it. If you did, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see all of you next time for a new video, as everything goes wrong here. Fantastic. Thank you, and bye-bye.